Nassau County, New York stands defiant for transphobia. A Minnesota school district says they're in the tank for Trump. A debate on inclusion featured some heavy hitters. A different debate, let yours truly be a part of it. And Carly's commentary on a candidate seeking to harm trans kids for votes and the celebration of a friend, sister, and mentor. Hello again, everybody. I'm Carly Chardonnay Webb. At the top tonight, a New York State court upheld a ban on transgender participation in sports in a decision Monday. The ruling upholds a law passed by Nassau County last year that bans transgender women and girls from participating in any women's and girls' sports played at county-run venues. In his ruling, State Judge R. Bruce Cousins wrote this local law narrowly tailored to achieve the objectives and does not categorically exclude transgender individuals from athletic participation. The law regulates access to women and girls categories in county-run facilities for organized athletic events. The decision ended a year-long lawsuit initiated by the Long Island Roller Rebels roller derby team backed by the New York Civil Liberties Union. The effort has been a centerpiece of the GOP county-controlled county legislature and Republican County Executive Bruce Blakeman. In February 2024, Blakeman put forth an executive order calling for the ban, believed to be the first of its type in the United States. The NYCLU plans to appeal the ruling. More than 150 school board members across Minnesota have signed a letter calling for the state to comply with a federal mandate that forbids transgender girls from participating with cisgender girls in high school sports. Now, one school district, the Forest Lake School District, has formally called for the Minnesota High School League to rescind their policies on transgender inclusion to stay in line with the Trump administration executive order on February 5th. Now, the state is in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. Last week, the U.S. Department of Education said the MHSL must revise their policy in the next 10 days or, quote, face imminent enforcement action. The MHSL, the state governing body for high school athletics, previously stated that their regulations enacted in 2015 are in line with the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Now, the state responded preemptively in the spring. Attorney General Keith Ellison filing a lawsuit against the Trump administration over the issue. Now, this issue is prepared to come to the head in the nation's highest court. The U.S. Supreme Court begins hearings on this issue in the matter of the Save Women's Sports Acts in Idaho and West Virginia in the coming weeks. Now, as the debate raged here in the United States, there was an interesting exchange between differing opinions at play at the Play Your Game conference in Tampere, Finland on Monday. Voices from all points of the intellectual compass got together and had a debate on trans inclusion in sports. It was quite interesting, so let's take a deep dive. The participants included Grace McKenzie of the Sports and Rights Alliance, rugby athlete who started a petition to fight the World Rugby ban back in 2020. I had the opportunity to interview her back then at the start of the petition. Pia Johnson, Bureau member from European Aquatics. Dr. Roger Pelkey, Professor Emeritus at the University of Colorado and the founder of the Honest Broker blog site. Johanna Harper, Adjunct Professor at the University of Western Ontario, and perhaps the world's foremost researcher in transgender athletes and performance, and Professor John Pike, Professor of Philosophy at the Open University of the UK, and a known professional transphobe. But the proceedings opened up with Grace McKenzie, who began with simple, clear humanity.
I want to start off, show of hands, who here knows a trans athlete personally? Great. Please keep your hands in the air if you are a cis athlete who has competed against a transgender athlete. Great. If you feel comfortable, please keep your hand raised if you are a transgender athlete yourself. And if you are a trans feminine athlete who has been impacted by a sports ban, please keep your hand in the air. I'd like everybody to look around and please keep the context of the dearth of hands in the air as we go through this conversation today. My name is Grace McKenzie. I am a daughter, I am a sister, I am a lifelong athlete, and I am a transgender woman. I've played almost every team sport that is played competitively in North America, finally settling on rugby at the end of my athletic career. For 24 years, I was held back from transitioning and living my authentic truth because of a fear of losing access to the sporting environment that taught me so much about life, teamwork, resilience, how to win with grace, and how to lose together. However, about a year after starting my hormonal transition, I was recruited to a women's rugby team in San Francisco, even though I myself didn't think that I belonged there. The person quite literally said, "If you're crazy enough to step on the pitch with us, we don't care what you are." Trans women, under the IOC Stockholm Convention since 2003, have been allowed to compete at the highest level of our sport as long as they maintained a testosterone threshold below a specific maximum. However, 2 years after I began my playing career, World Rugby revisited their ban, or they revisited their policy around transgender participation, passing a full suite blanket ban on our participation, which affected a grand total of 0 elite athletes. Feeling a threat to my safe space as a trans athlete, I started an organization called Rugby for All that introduced a petition circulated and signed by over 35,000 athletes, allies, and Olympians around the world, asking them to rescind the ban, which they did ignore. However, USA Rugby and a few other national unions around the world broke ranks with World Rugby and decided to keep the game open and inclusive as it had been for over 20 years. It's very clear that this is a conversation seeking a solution to a problem that does not exist. We've already spoken about whataboutism during this conference, and I think you're going to hear a lot of that tonight as well. When we talk about fairness and safety for women in sports, I want us to consider who we are defining as a woman and who we are actually talking about keeping safe and allowing to compete fairly. I don't believe that it is me who they are talking about as a transgender woman. However, this conversation is in a greater political context. In a world where we are facing the rising tide of authoritarianism, it's not a surprise that transgender women and girls are oftentimes the #1 target of these authoritarian governments. We are not a threat to women, but we are a threat to the patriarchal power structures that oppress all of us, because by birthright, we are granted the privilege of masculinity and choose voluntarily to give it away, which destroys the facade of that power. At the end of the day, I played women's rugby for 7 years without issue from teammates, competitors, referees, or any of my coaches, and that's something that can never be taken away from me. It is my lived experience versus philosophical conjecture in this debate, and I am proud to have played alongside the sisters that I made. The final thing I want to say is specifically to any trans women and girls who are watching today. I see you, I love you, I am with you. This too shall pass, and you also belong in sport.
In stark contrast was John Pike and, true to form, professional transphobe. Here's a few examples of how he attempts to derail the conversation and demean the two trans women on the panel.
Categories that are based on bodies and categories that are based on performance metrics. Now, we don't tend to have the second. We have leagues and cup competitions, but we organise our categories on the basis of types of bodies, not on the basis of someone's level of performance, at least in championship competition. We sort athletes on the basis of the kind of body that they have, male or female, young or old, light or heavy, impaired or not. And these physical characteristics form the basis of fair competition. What does this mean in practice? Again, you just need to follow the logic of the argument. Think about this carefully, abstractly, without emotion, and in order to be coherent. What this means is that any male advantage, no matter how small, is unfair in female sport. Trying to handicap male athletes, including those male athletes who identify as women, to make their inclusion in female sport fair is a category error.
Oh, misgendering, typical for John Pike. You know, for a guy who claims to like women's sports, it's clear that he doesn't like women. Don't believe me? Roll the tape.
In strength, again, the pattern holds where the absolute measures are higher, the relative measures are the same. If we look at strength events such as throwing, it's absolute strength that's more important. If we look at strength measurements or explosive sports such as jumping, it's relative strength that's most important, because then you're using strength to propel your body. When the trans women are compared to the cis men, there's a greater than 3 standard deviation difference in the two groups. So trans women do not perform like cis men. And the idea that, quote unquote, male advantage remains, I think is a very tenuous idea.
You know, I may disagree with John. I'm not a philosopher who identifies as a scientist. I have a background in organic chemistry. This is a fallacious argument when you make this comparison. I would encourage you to consider an able-bodied athlete who does become disabled, which is a much more clear comparison to somebody who loses advantage through hormonal transition. Would you deny somebody who experienced an accident where they lost a leg or another limb the right to participate in the Paralympics because they
obviously
were originally...
not. Obviously not.
Right? Why would you do the same for a transgender athlete?
Because you haven't changed sex.
I think that's debatable.
Rude. Quite rude. On one hand, he spent half the time blaming leftists for championing the issue and bringing Donald Trump into power, and then turns around and says something like this.
Yes, I wanted to respond to this US centrism, this is Americentrism,
Canadian,
and this centering of everything around Trump. Right? This is basic kind of chauvinism. Here we've got an issue in the ethics of sport. Right? It's not Trump's issue, it's an issue for sport. I have no time for Donald Trump. This is not about Donald Trump. This is about women's rights, female athletes' rights, and fairness in sport. Now, what you're doing here is kind of distorting the argument away from what we should be talking about, which is fairness, categories, advantages, into some for or against Trump nonsense. Trump's no friend of women. He's no friend of women's sport, as far as I'm concerned. But I am, and the argument should be about women's sport, not about Donald Trump. Okay. It's a form of US chauvinism.
But this is why someone like a Dr. Roger Pielke mattered on this panel.
Once you decide who's a woman and who's not a woman, then you're making a judgment that's ultimately a political judgment. I was an expert witness in Caster Semenya's case in 2019 before Cass, and agree or disagree with that judgment. One of the things that the judges were very careful about is they said, we're making no judgment about whether Caster is a biological male, biological female. She is, according to our standards, a woman. The only question is, does she have an unfair advantage? Sports federations face a choice, and I agree with John about not making it about Trump. I would say the federations have made it about Trump, largely because a lot of American athletes in swimming, in particular, in athletics also, have appealed to the Trump administration for help in banning trans women. So if you don't want it to be about politics and Trump, then don't make it about politics and Trump. The sports organizations can handle this issue by simply saying, this is an issue within the women's category. It's only about unfair advantage. We're not going to misgender people. We're not going to call people names. We're not going to use the term biological male. We're just going to evaluate fairness.
And speaking of fairness, Harper talked about that in addition to the research he's doing and what that research says and doesn't say.
One of the things that's been most frustrating for me is that a number of women categorize what is fair or not in terms of whether I beat them in a race. If they finish in front of me, it's fair. If I beat them, it's unfair. However, I've also made numerous friends. I've belonged to running clubs in 3 different countries, Canada, US, UK. My teammates and many of my competitors have been very supportive. A woman from Atlanta that I raced, and we were back and forth, and she said, you know, sometimes you beat me and sometimes I beat you. And it's just like racing any other woman. It is without doubt true that a population that goes through a testosterone-fueled puberty will gain substantial athletic advantage over a population that does not experience that sort of puberty. It is also true that when transgender women undergo hormone therapy, which consists of testosterone blockage plus estrogen, that there are profound effects on the athletic capabilities of trans women. And we can put these effects into three categories. There are complete changes, incomplete changes, and factors that don't change. Hemoglobin in trans women will very quickly go from male levels to female levels with hormone therapy. Hemoglobin cells live in our body for 120 days, and we produce them at a rate that's proportional to testosterone in our blood. So trans women will, after testosterone suppression, will very quickly acquire female hemoglobin levels, and those are very important for endurance sports. The second category is incomplete changes. And these would include muscular changes. Trans women will lose muscle strength, mass, etc., but trans women will maintain some strength advantage over cis women. How large an advantage that is somewhat debatable, but those changes take longer and take at least 2 years to complete. And then there are factors such as height, which don't change with hormone therapy. As Roger said, in some sports, height is advantageous, in some sports, it's disadvantageous. But it doesn't change. In addition to advantages, trans women will have disadvantages as well. Trans women's larger bodies are now being powered by reduced muscle mass and reduced aerobic capacity, and that can lead to disadvantages in things like quickness, endurance, and recovery. And I hope to talk a little bit more about that later. And the science of transgender athletic performance is in its infancy. There are currently only 6 published studies that examine trans athletes in particular. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and it's getting more challenging. Recently had funding for a project that was pulled, which was very unfortunate. In my personal opinion, the changes with hormone therapy change the advantages that trans women have from category advantages to competition advantages. And while John may think that that's impossible to go from one of those categories to another, I do not.
But of course, professional transphobes are going to transphobe. Pike demeaned anyone and everyone who didn't agree with him, whether they were trans or, in the case of Shireen Ahmed, cis.
Hi, Shireen Ahmed, Canadian journalist and alleged muddled thinker. So my question is actually, I wanted to point out before doing this, I had the honor of interviewing Harrison Brown, who is a trans hockey player. He wrote a book with his sister, Rachel Brown, called Let Us Play, and they specifically talked about moral panic and how that is implemented by people who are anti-trans and try to marginalize and exclude. And we're talking about exclusion not only at competitive levels. The FA on May 1st did a blanket trans ban, which affects 0 professional women footballers in the UK. And they still did it. What it did affect was grassroots players who cannot play anymore. So just to correct, this isn't only about competition. This is about right to sport and life. My question, John, because you're talking, and this is specifically for you, right, is that you're talking about protection of women's sport. As someone who's advocated and covered women's sports for decades, there's also been other disadvantaged groups, racialized women, poor women, disabled women. So those that are predominantly advocating for literally to exclude trans women, where were they before? Where were they when Black women, Indigenous women, women who are disabled, who are poor, have no access, where were they, and how come they're suddenly popping up like daisies now?
Right. So you got the question?
Yeah, look, I think that's a rhetorical question directed at me. I'll try and deal with an actual question.
I'd like to commend both Harper and Mackenzie for maintaining their dignity and composure when running up against John Pike, a nasty British transphobe. Now, Mackenzie lives in the Netherlands now, and she's still doing the work, but throughout this entire panel, she maintained dignity and a clear focus.
As a transgender athlete, do you think that it's easy for me to get to a 6 a.m. workout when I wake up every single day and see another one of my human rights eradicated by the administration under the United States that I lived in for the last 7 years? Makes it a little bit more difficult than a male athlete who isn't facing that sort of discrimination, right? So these are things that need to be discussed, and you can actually see, if you study the history of performance between women's and men's sports, as we have made gains in equality between the resources and advantages given to female athletes, the performance gap between those bimodal distributions has shrunk across numerous sports, right? So there is science and there is evidence that suggests that that can almost be as, if not sometimes more, determinant of somebody's athletic advantage or their ability to compete at the highest level of their sport. It saved my life because of the mental health state that I was in after the first year of my transition. But beyond that, it expanded my identity of what a woman can be. It showed me that I can be masculine and feminine and still be considered a woman, that there is strength in that. And it taught me the value of being included in spaces that protect me specifically as a woman from the harm that I am at risk of as a transgender woman specifically, right? I don't think I can describe the feeling of gender euphoria that comes from being included finally in your life in the place that you belong for the first time. It's a very unique trans experience, so you'll have to take my word for it, but it taught me that, and it also taught me that every body shape, size, advantage or disadvantage belongs in sport and can find a place in sport somewhere. Rugby is the best case study for that.
If you want to see this panel in its entirety, I have the link in the comments just for you. When we return to Transposition Sports, Smith College had a similar discussion, and can you believe they let me be a part of it? And in Carly's commentary tonight, we look at a candidate who's using transphobia and picking on kids to try and get votes, and a birthday tribute to mentor and chosen family. I'm Carly Chardonnay-Webb. This is Transposition Sports. Stay with us. Let's take a look at Protest Watch, brought to you by
Karens Against Women's Sports. Because we don't really care about women's sports. We're here for the transphobia.
USA Fencing Event, College Park, Maryland. Stephanie Turner is set to meet Redmond Sullivan in a pool match, and Turner decided to forfeit the match on bended knee because Sullivan is a trans woman, and even though she's eligible to compete, Turner feels it's unfair. Now, check out the Darvo effect going here. Turner's the transphobe, but she's being cast as the victim, and Sullivan's being cast as the villain.
Refusing to fence because this person is a man and I am a woman, and this is a women's tournament, and I refuse to fence on principle.
Oh, Stephanie, I heard about the check you got from the transphobes. Oh, I'm not mad at you. Girl, get your coins. I ain't mad at you, but I will sing about your ass. Trans-identified in your spaces. To you, we're men and we're all the same. You get all up in our faces, and you hate that we play a game. You don't think trans folks are human. You'd love to line us up against the wall, and now they offered you some money to make sure that you hate us all. You're a professional transphobe. Transphobe for money. Hate all trans, that's what you do. You're a professional transphobe. Transphobe for money. Wiley Gaines will employ you.
I interrupt Transposition Sports because I'm cute and I can. And for this message from the angry gay grandpa. You don't pay me enough for this, Carly.
So maybe I'll start a little bit softer.
Do This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine.
Dad?
Before you say anything, I just want to apologize for what I said this morning. I've been doing a lot of thinking. If you want to change your name, if you want to wear a dress.
It's a skirt, Dad.
Skirt. I don't know the kind of support you need, but let's get you some for all this transgender stuff.
Wait. Are you serious? Dad, what is this?
Oh, this is me supporting you. This is me saying I love you. This is me not losing you.
I love you, Dad.
Love you. Holly.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
Welcome back to Transposition Sports. I'm Carly Chardonnay-Webb. Thursday night, Smith College in Massachusetts had a panel discussion on trans inclusion in sports and the intersections of gender, race, and inclusion. They had a panel with some very learned minds on it. One of those, Dr. Erica Tibbetts, senior lecturer in exercise and sports studies at Smith, and quite active in matters of equity in sport. Another, Dr. Anna Bay from Athlete Alley, co-author along with Chris Mosier on an upcoming book called Fair Game, Trans Athletes and the Future of Sport. That book is due out in January. And there was a third, yours truly, an athlete, journalist, and a lover of sport. It was an excellent exchange in front of a room largely of student athletes at the college. Here's some highlights of an evening where I know I learned a lot and discussed a hopeful future even amid the present crisis.
A paradigm change, we need systemic change. And that change may have to come from thinking in effect, in some ways going back to the future, and in some ways thinking of a future where we can do more. We have had regulation on trans people in sports at the elite level since 2003. The hysteria doesn't match what the scoreboard is saying. We have had due regulation in the NCAA since 2011, and again, the hysteria doesn't match what the scoreboard is saying. We have had high school regulations in various states beginning in 2012. And again, the hysteria does not match what the scoreboard is saying. And while all this has been going on, affecting transgender people, the real thing that makes me angry is the fact that we have returned to the era of Avery Brundage. We have returned to naked parades. We have returned to sex testing. We have returned to a group of men in lab coats deciding who is a woman, who is not, who should play, who should not. And just a few days, last week, Caster Semenya dropped her legal case. Now understand what that means. Understand who this woman has been for 15 years. Understand that. Understand that she has fought, she has been treated in a manner that I truly believe that no Western governing body will allow an athlete from Western Europe or the United States or Canada to be treated. And it's happening again with Amani Khalif. It's happening again with Yuwen Ting. And it's time for athletes to stand up and say no. And the generation of athletes who need to be leading that charge is sitting in this room. The generation of athletes that must lead that charge dropped the serious T on the WNBA commissioner a week ago.
And I think the question that comes to mind for me is less around the stories that we hear and more about the stories that we don't hear. So for one of the books I've written, we started interviewing trans athletes 5 years ago. We interviewed 20 trans athletes, all different ages, all different sports, from all over the United States. And at that time, our thinking was, we want to introduce the world to trans athletes. I started this work 5 years ago as a cis person. I did not think that this would be the work that I ultimately did. But what I realized very early on was most people had an opinion about trans athletes and couldn't name a trans athlete, and had never spoken to one, and had never heard the story of a trans athlete. And so my co-authors and I wrote this book trying to share some of those stories. It comes out in January, and what I will say is 5 years ago when we wrote it, all of those athletes could compete. As of today, one can. One is still legally able to compete in the United States. And that person is 48 years old. So I say this because I also think we're not just talking about the stories we don't hear right now, but we're talking about the stories that we're not going to hear over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because those athletes are not going to be participating in sport. They already aren't, right? So I think the silence says a lot more than the stories I could potentially tell. I think the idea of politicians getting in Riley Gaines' ear, it's not just politicians. It's people with a lot of money, a lot of money. I want to draw a few other points about Leah Thomas and that situation, as well as what precisely happened with the NCAA. So Carly pointed out that the race between Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines was in 2022. But actually, the media attention around Leah Thomas started in December of 2021. It really kicked off on December 6th. It was a Monday. And I know this because I did a very deep analysis of it. But what we know about that, why December? Because in January, what happens in the United States is there are state legislative sessions. Now, we knew in the LGBTQ rights movement that 2022 was going to be a really hard year for trans rights. We knew that there was going to be a lot of legislation coming down the pipe. We didn't know how much it would be. We knew it was going to be rough. We had no idea how much and how bad it would be. Riley Gaines happened to be competing that December. She happened to win one race. And for my swimmers, we could talk about how good or not good Leah Thomas is at swimming. In my estimation, she's okay. But she happened to win one race at the right time, and she became the poster child of this issue. This was constructed, right? It's not like trans athletes are coming out of the woodwork and all of a sudden we need to think about it. This was all calculated. The NCAA had been offered guidance around trans athletes annually or every 6 months for 10 years. They did not do anything about it until Leah Thomas came on the scene. And then they did something that they've never done before in 2 different ways. First of all, the Board of Governors, which is 9 people, at that time, only 3 of those people had ever participated in sport. So these are college presidents, sometimes they're athletic directors, sometimes they're not even involved in college sport. These 9 people, including Charlie Baker, decided in a closed-door meeting that lasted 40 minutes that they were going to change the policy around trans athletes. They had never done this before. And what's even more scary about this is not only did 9 people decide the fate of 500,000 athletes without consulting experts, myself included, they also made the decision for the first time ever to actually revoke rights. The NCAA has never done that in history. They've only given more access to athletes over time. This was the first time that they actually denied access.
The worst form of transphobe is a polite one. And a lot of people bring their polite transphobia into the chat when they talk about fairness, but when I give them the question, whose fairness are we centering in this moment? And at that point, they got to do one of two things. They either got to try and stay polite, which is almost impossible because that's a question that's right there, or you've got to be honest. Because the fact of the matter is, was it fair that Leah Thomas got death threats? How fair was that? Was it fair that Leah Thomas literally had to get on a plane, go to Atlanta, not knowing if she got to compete or not? How fair is that? Is it fair that a high school kid has to walk into a track with protesters, lining both sides of it? Is it fair that that kid's mother is being accosted by an elected official at every meet? That happened to A.B. Hernandez's mother. There is a woman who wants to run for state superintendent of education in California next year on the ballot, who literally stalked this woman at every high school meet that her daughter was in last season. And there's video that she actually showed video of herself doing this. You can't say I'm lying about it because she put it on her Twitter. My question is, how fair is that? So when I hear fairness and safety, it falls on deaf ears. It's people trying to be polite. So the best way to deal with that question, coming from people, especially bad faith actors, is hit them immediately with, whose fairness are you centering? Because at that point, we got to be honest. And that's the biggest thing I want from Vegas. Just be honest. I mean, I'm talking Pete Bull Connor, again, PW, vote to honest. I can deal with that. But there's a lot of people trying to be polite or trying to nibble at the corners, and it's too late in the day for that. Let's be real about what we're about, because believe me, congressional Republicans and the President of the United States, they're being honest. In fact, they're being painfully honest about how they feel about me as an American. Oh, by the way, to them, I'm not an American, just saying.
I think the question that comes up for me around this fear of unfairness is really centered in fear. And when I ask people, well, what precisely is unfair? They'll say, well, trans athletes are stealing scholarships, or they're stealing medals, or they're stealing whatever, the place of a cis woman on a team. And to be clear, that has never happened.
Yeah, can I ask a question? How can you steal something when you're eligible to compete for it?
Well, right. But I think the bottom line is when we're so concerned with people stealing, what that signals for me is that we are living in a scarcity mindset around women's sport. And we've been living in that mindset for a very long time. And that is because the system is unfair. When we look at what is fair and what is not fair, to me, it is not fair the way that women are treated in sporting systems writ large in this country and across the world. And as a Smith grad, I'm sure many of you can understand where I'm coming from with that. But the bottom line is, why are we talking about trans women who make up less than 0.5% of all athletes when we could be talking about the rates of sexual assault, sexual harassment, the lack of funding that women athletes get? The question in my mind is not whether trans athletes participating is unfair. It's why are we complacent about a system that is so blatantly unfair?
And not just unfair in sport, but unfair overall. Like, how many times have you heard, I've had someone walk up to me and say this, if they let people like you who play sport, you're going to take away all those opportunities from poor black and brown kids, like this person ever cared about poor black and brown kids. But that's where people, and talk about the scarcity mindset. You know what? If we actually treated education as a human right, nobody's jump shot would matter for getting into college anymore. Can we think about that? Can we talk about that? Can we talk about perhaps, and that's what I've told tons of people, it's like, you don't have a trans people in sports problem. You have a I've been priced out of higher education problem. The cure for that's all systemic change. But a lot of people don't want to hear those two words. They'd rather discriminate and keep us, like what Anna talked about, in a scarcity mindset. The solutions we need are going to begin when we start thinking beyond the idea that for me to win, you must lose. The zero-sum thinking has to end. There's enough resources for all of us. The problem is, some people want to hoard them.
Special thanks to Dr. Floyd Chung and Smith Associate Athletic Director for Diversity and Inclusion, Kelsey Park Smith, for putting this entire night together. I was proud to be a part of it. Finally tonight in Carly's commentary, it's election time, at least up here in the Northeast. It's municipal election time. And I know a few people who are running for office around parts where I live, and I happened to see an ad for a town council candidate in neighboring West Hartford, Connecticut, named Ben Lewis. Now, the town council elections are mainly about what the tax levy should be and public works, maybe a school bond issue or two. Lewis in his campaign announcement said, quote, "Instead of addressing local problems, Democrats hurl insults, tying Republicans to national campaign noise as if we're fighting some grand ideological battle. I'm above those petty squabbles." Now, if that's the case, candidate Lewis, please explain this.
I'm Ben Lewis, and high school sports must remain fair for our girls.
It erases the purpose of women's sports. We separate men's and women's athletics to give girls a fair arena to compete and succeed. If biological males are allowed into that space, the distinction becomes meaningless, and girls lose the very category that was created to protect them.
I will fight to preserve fairness in girls' sports and ensure that all of our girls have equal opportunity. I'm Ben Lewis, and I approve this message.
It's not surprising that this candidate is using transphobia to get a vote. After all, gosh darn it, he's a Republican.
Transphobia for a stronger America.
And not only that, he's a Connecticut Republican. And I remember, and a lot of other people do too, 5 years ago, the Connecticut Republican Party planned to demean 2 transgender high school students who participate in track and field to raise campaign cash. Just a note, Mr. Lewis, people in Connecticut don't take kindly to that. Plus, what you want to do violates state law. There's a little thing called Public Act 11-55. Maybe you've heard of it. One of the parts of that law is this. The public schools shall be open to children 5 years of age and over who reach an age of 5 before the first day of January of any school year, and each such child shall have and shall be so advised by the appropriate school authorities an equal opportunity to participate in the activities, programs, and courses of study offered in such public schools. At such time as the child becomes eligible to participate in such activities, programs, and courses of study without discrimination on account of race, color, sex, gender identity or expression, religion, national origin, or sexual orientation. That's the law. Yeah, I know your party doesn't really believe in the rule of law these days, and I would hope that voters in West Hartford don't get suckered into this monster movie nonsense that you put in this ad. You know something, sir? To me, there is a special place in hell for someone who will pick on school kids to get a seat on a town council. Hashtag just saying. And finally tonight, happy birthday to a friend of the show, a friend of humanity, a sister, a mentor in fighting the good fight, and not to mention a fellow fan of Prince. Happy birthday, Kimora Harrington. The Connecticut activist and community leader turned 54 Thursday. Equal parts mystifying, magnifying, and challenging. Her voice has been a beacon for LGBTQ rights, not just in Connecticut, but across the country. And in some ways, I'm standing here doing what I do because she taught me so many lessons in how to do it and do it better. Happy birthday, Sister Kimora, and may we continue to fight and live to see the dawn. That's Transposition Sports for this week. I'm Carly Chardonnay-Webb, and I end the show with a snippet of wisdom from my sister, someone who's imparted so much wisdom to me for years. So long, everybody.
We're not stronger because we were the same. We were not stronger because of our commonalities. We were stronger because of our solidarity towards each other. We were stronger because the anti-war queers showed up at the same places where those weird environmentalists showed up, where all of those let's make sure that we can get married people showed up, when all of those other folks showed up, and we understood that it was our solidarity. That we did not waste time trying to figure out how to pretend that we're all the same. Please look at me. If you know me, I dress for you. I am in your house. This is not my authentic way of being, but I need you to hear me. So I showed up in your house looking like y'all. When you come to my house, come show out. When you come to my house, say the uncomfortable things. When you come to my house, we fight fascism. And we are not nice about it.